On October 23rd, 2015, Scott Cawthon posted a cryptic image of a lone Freddy plush to the official ScottGames.com website, labeled "Don't Wake the Baby.jpg" in the files. It seemed unassuming at first, but when fans brightened the image, they saw something ominously lurking over the Fnaf 4 bed. That something was Nightmarionne, the replacement for Nightmare in Fnaf 4's Halloween edition, essentially a Nightmare version of Fnaf 2's Puppet. But while Scott claimed that this Halloween update wasn't canon and that none of the characters in it were tied to the main story, that statement would very quickly be proven wrong with the release of Ultimate Custom Night, where lo and behold, Nightmarionne was the icon for serial killer William Afton's personal purgatory. And this mysterious character has appeared many times since then. In fact, Nightmarionne might hold the key to deciphering the entire modern FNAF lore, as Steelwell and Scott have been referencing and hiding this character all across the new era. Using hints from Help Wanted, Security Breach, and especially the newly released Secret of the Mimic, we can piece together the truth about not only Nightmarionne, but the entire Mimic saga. Trust me, what I found might just piece together everything. I'm Withered Circle, and it's time to decipher the secret behind FNAF's most canon, non-canon character, once and for all. Okay, before we get into the whole solving the lore bit, allow me to draw your attention to the jumpscare sound of Jackie, one of the antagonists of Secret of the Mimic. Notice anything noteworthy? Well, most of you probably noticed that it's a remade version of the Security Breach jumpscare sound, but those of you with a keen ear probably heard a different audio layered in with the rest, a low-pitched garbling, barely audible at the end of the jumpscare. Let me replay it. For those of you unaware, this is the final part of Nightmarionne's jumpscare. This audio is only ever used in relation to that character and Nightmare, and plays when it kills you in FNAF 4. But that's not all. This jumpscare sound appears again in Security Breach when you die to the Nightmare staff bots in the sewers. These staff bots are obviously meant to look like Nightmarionne. The black streaks, the jaw, the "in your dreams" text scribbled on their chest, everything ties back to the Nightmare puppet. Security Breach and its DLC expansion Ruin also have those weird black and white puppet wires in certain areas, as well as Nightmarionne plushies scattered across seemingly random locations. One of the collectibles you can obtain in the base game of Security Breach is called the Nightmare plush, and depicts, you guessed it, Nightmarionne. Something else that depicts an important detail is that subscribe button, so be sure to tap it 14 times, then make sure you're subscribed after that. Just tap it till you're subscribed. Anyway, even as early as FNAF Help Wanted back in 2019, Nightmarionne has had a weird presence in the Steelwell's games. In the VR title, he appeared with an entire unique level dedicated all to himself, and as a collectible the player can obtain. But why? Why did Steelwell and Scott decide to put so much emphasis on this seemingly random, non-canon character in the games after FNAF 6? What about Nightmarionne matters so much that he needs to appear all across the franchise? Well, something that a lot of theorists mentioned when discussing this is the theme most strongly linked to Nightmarionne: death.
This time, death cannot save you. Let's taste death again and again and again.
Using his voice lines from Ultimate Custom Night, many theorists concluded that Nightmarionne was the Grim Reaper incarnate, and that his appearance in UCN symbolized the death of William Afton, with his modern appearances being linked to the massive amount of deaths that occurred at the Mega Pizzaplex. Others have also connected Nightmarionne to the soul or agony of Charlotte Emily, but this has been mostly dismissed in recent years, as Nightmarionne is sadistic and violent, which is very different from Charlie's personality. So, for most theorists, the solution was that Nightmarionne was death. And that's where the majority of fans ended the discussion. But surely that's not it, right? I knew there had to be more to this mystery, and after Secret of the Mimic, I can confidently say that there is more to Nightmarionne's involvement in the later games than we thought. Let's go back to the example that I brought up first with Jackie. Why, out of all the characters in the game, is Jackie the only one with this garbled sound in her jumpscare? Well, think about what she looks like. Jackie is a jack-in-the-box, like the puppet, with the same theme as the puppet, my grandfather's clock. It even takes on an appearance similar to Nightmarionne halfway through her chase sequence. Obviously, there's some connection to be made here. But what could it be? Further on into the game, in Edwin Murray's private office, we can find his computer, with two tabs that we can't access: Alt Fazbear Designs and Puppet Designs. We already know that Edwin helped design some of the original Freddy Fazbear characters, and even tried to pitch new versions of William and Henry's Springlock suit, so him helping design the puppet isn't out of the question. But then again, the puppet and Nightmarionne are pretty different characters. One of them isn't even supposed to exist. So, what's going on? Well, hear me out. I think Nightmarionne is more important to the Mimic program than he is to anything else. Think about it. The first chase of the game revolves around the Mimic in a version of the puppet. Nightmarionne's voice is notably the only voice in Ultimate Custom Night did glitches, like the Mimic, and of course, there's Nightmarionne imagery all over the pizzaplex, similar to how the Mimic is likely in control of that entire building. Let's assume Nightmarionne is somehow tied to the Mimic. What do the plushies and wires mean? How do they connect the secret of the Mimic? And most importantly of all, why did the Mimic code that ended up in the pizzaplex choose Nightmarionne to represent itself? Well, I think we need to look past Nightmarionne being a nightmare and instead focus on his role in the new era. When Scott Cawthon said none of the Halloween edition characters were canon, it was 2015. 10 years later, he's made it more than clear that the Halloween nightmares are important, as they appear in later games like Ultimate Custom Night and Help Wanted. But let's focus on the modern era. When collecting the AR Nightmare plush in Security Breach Ruin, Cassie will comment that Nightmarionne is a character, quote, from that old headset game. After all, the first time anyone in-universe heard of Nightmarionne was through the Freddy Fazbear virtual experience from Help Wanted. The story of Help Wanted explains to us that Fazbear Entertainment paid a, quote, rogue indie game dev to create the first 4 Fnaf games to advertise the brand, but we never find out if the Halloween edition was ever made by that developer. This means that Help Wanted was the public's first exposure to any of the Halloween characters. So what if in the modern era, Nightmarionne isn't a symbol of death like we thought, but instead of the Mimic? A machine that we know is somehow involved with Help Wanted. No matter what you believe is going on with Glitchtrap, you have to accept that the Mimic has some involvement with it, whether it's in full control or it's just part of the entity's code. For whatever reason, the Mimic is tied to Nightmarionne as early as 1979, and this connection continues into the modern saga, where it seemingly takes on the Nightmarionne persona to take over the pizzaplex. But wait, why do I think the Mimic is in charge of the pizzaplex in the first place? Isn't that a bit of a stretch? Well, trust me. It isn't. In the Tales from the Pizzaplex story, The Storyteller, we find out that Fazbear Entertainment used the Mimic's code to AI generate stories for the Pizzaplex, to automate shows, performances, and so on. But once that Mimic code was given access to the Pizzaplex's programming, it spread through the entire building, using wires, duplicating its code all over the Pizzaplex, and taking over the animatronics. When the Mimic takes over the Glamrocks, they start acting abnormally, like caricatures of themselves. Their worst features become amplified, turning Chica from slightly greedy to an insatiable glutton, or Monty from a character with slight anger issues to the perpetually pissed off gator we see in Security Breach. You get the point. Mimic virus bad. This story is a perfect parallel to what happens in Security Breach. After a system update, 3 out of the 4 main Glamrock animatronics become violent, and the entire Pizzaplex gets overrun by these black and white wires, Nightmarionne plushies, system glitches, the Nightmare staff bots, and so on. We know the books don't line up one-to-one with the games, but Secret of the Mimic proved that they can be used as secondary canon to draw conclusions from, and carry them over to the games. I think this is what Scott was trying to tell us with The Storyteller. After Help Wanted, the Glitchtrap virus went into the Pizzaplex and spread throughout the building. And since the Mimic is almost definitely involved in that code, it started showing its influence on the pizzeria. But anyway, back to Nightmarionne itself. Let's say that the Mimic does have a relation to Nightmarionne in the new games, and that's why it chooses to show itself as a twisted version of the puppet. What made it adopt this persona all the way back in 1979? After all, if we can hear the Nightmarionne jump scare and Jackie's scream, surely that means it must have been like this from the start, right? Let's think about the 2 main personalities the Mimic adopted while at Murray's Costume Manor. The first version, M1, imitated Edwin Murray's dead wife Fiona. Edwin used this program to pretend his wife was still alive, and eventually it made its way into F10N4, or the early version of the Mex's machine from Ruin. The second version, M2, imitated Edwin's son David. This one was a lot more primitive, and controls the endo that chases after us during the gameplay of Secret of the Mimic. Ever since Secret of the Mimic came out, I assumed M2 was a part of Mimic that made its way into Glitchtrap. But what if that's not the case? Before she met Edwin, Fiona was a puppet master and creator at Murray's Costume Manor. Her job was to help puppeteer the show in the MCM theater, as well as provide voices for the characters.
I'm Fiona, and you are?
Edwin Murray. This is my dad's place. But that doesn't matter. I heard you were a puppeteer, and I wanted to record your voice.
Oh, well, yes, I used to be.
Well, that's great. Do you mind if I record you for a test?
So, you want to record me with that?
Fiona is the one who made the plushies David played with while he was still alive, like the White Tiger plush and Deadeye Roxy. Fiona is very strongly associated with puppets and plushies, and Edwin's last creation before going missing was the puppet design we find in his office. Now let's have a look at the first time we saw Nightmarionne, shall we? That's right, the Fnaf 4 teaser image that shows Nightmarionne, the puppet master, lurking over a Freddy plushie. And the connections don't end there. In the build-up to Fnaf 6, we got a series of teasers showing that same Freddy plush in a dark void. But again, if you brighten the image, you can see puppet strings rising up from the plush. And think about the song tied to both Jackie and the puppet, My Grandfather's Clock. The song talks about a grandfather clock that stayed in a man's living room for many years, up until he died, when it stopped ticking. This ties back to Murray's Costume Manor. David's grandfather, Edwin's dad, died in the mid-1970s, and his death led to the steady decline of MCM, just like that grandfather clock. In a way, the puppet that Edwin was designing could have been a tribute to his dead wife, who always loved puppets and plushies, just like the puppet later on in the series, who is tied to the souls of the missing kids, and resides in an area of the Fnaf 2 building dedicated to plushies. All of a sudden, it makes sense why the mimic takes on the appearance of Nightmarionne. It's hanging on to its last vague memory of Fiona, the person the M1 program was imitating or was partially possessed by. If M1 was the mimic code that made its way into Glitchtrap, the narrative starts piecing together. The M1 program, the one meant to mimic Fiona, latched onto her past as a puppeteer, and based on the puppet blueprints in Edwin's workshop, created a dark, twisted version of the puppet, fueled by the spiritual energy from Fiona's death. That's why we only hear the Nightmarionne jumpscare in Jackie, because Jackie herself is a puppet, and shares her main music with the marionette. The M1 program ends up in Glitchtrap and eventually makes its way into the Mega Pizzaplex, controlling the building and adding itself into existing places like the wires, plushies, and so on. So if we follow this logic, that means M1 is the mimic code that ended up in Glitchtrap, and M2 goes on to become the endoskeleton that chases after Cassie at the end of the Ruin DLC. This is pretty different from the narrative most of us went with after Secrets of the Mimic, but honestly, it works. It explains the division between the two main mimic branches, associating one with Nightmarionne and the other with David Murray. In the Tales from the Pizzaplex story Tiger Rock, one of the mimic's digital personas is a glamrock white tiger called Tiger Rock. This tiger stalks the protagonist every day after an incident with the AR booth. One of the forms Tiger Rock takes on to stalk the main character is a white owl with green and blue eyes, just like the white owl that represents David in the Moon.exe minigame. In Moon.exe, we likely play as the mimic, tasked with putting David Murray back together no matter the cost. So it would make sense for M1 to use those memories of David to create itself a new digital appearance. This all lines up with the new games. I know what you're thinking. This could make sense with the Steelwall era of FNAF, but surely Nightmarionne's appearances in FNAF 4 and Ultimate Custom Night have to hold some importance, right? So far, it seems like Nightmarionne's presence in FNAF 4 and UCN is completely separate from his lore in the new era. But is that true? As I brought up earlier, Nightmarionne is the only character in Ultimate Custom Night whose voice noticeably stutters and glitches, like it's a digital entity. In FNAF 4, Nightmarionne replaces Nightmare, who's likely a faulty Nightmare animatronic, whether that's due to illusion discs or nightmare gas or whatever. In Sister Location, we find out that the Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals bunker is directly connected to the FNAF 4 rooms, and that they're actually nightmare experiments William Afton is performing on innocent children. But we also find out that those experiment chambers and the bunker are connected to the Afton family house itself, which is located above Circus Baby's. The experiment chambers are also connected to Fredbear's family diner, and in turn the FNAF 6 location, which is likely tied to Circus Babies, because we see it full of technology and blueprints that only William had access to, meaning Henry Emily likely found them under his pizzeria. Fellow theorist Cryonide is a strong proponent of a theory called Fazburger, which essentially means that almost all the locations we've seen across the FNAF games end up above or below each other in some way, as they're all built on the same plot of land. We know the FNAF 6 location and Murray's Costume Manor are all under the Pizzaplex, and since we know Circus Babies is tied to Fredbear's, and we have reason to assume those are tied to FNAF 6, these locations would be down there in the sinkhole somewhere as well. It's a bit confusing, but you probably get the point. All these locations are down there somewhere. What's interesting to me is the connection between Murray's Costume Manor and the Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals bunker. In Secrets of the Mimic, we find out through one of the text logs that William Afton took possession of not only the MCM factory, but also of Edwin's own house, despite his promises. Software development in the entire MCM catalog. We would love to have you on as a lead engineer. Although we now technically own the land, we would never touch the house your parents built. We feel the software has been more than fair, considering how far behind you are. It's just too much for you to handle alone. We are waiting for your response. W.A. If we go into Edwin's house, we see that David's bedroom is eerily similar to the crying child's bedroom from Fnaf 4, further solidifying this connection. All this to say that if the Afton family house is tied to Mary's costume manor and the nightmare experiments, the connection between Nightmarionne and the Mimic becomes clear. I personally believe William Afton used the Mimic code for his Funtime animatronics, so who's to say part of that code couldn't make it into the nightmare experiments and take on the shape of Nightmarionne. Obviously, this isn't what Scott intended when making the Halloween edition. At the time, Nightmarionne was just a fun remixed version of Nightmare, but new meanings can be given to old pieces of lore without retconning anything, and this is a very good example of that. If the Mimic code made it into those experiments and took on the shape of Nightmarionne, it explains why it sticks with that form later and how it ends up in the pizzaplex. So not only do we have a modern era connection with M1 and the puppet schematics, but also a classic era connection with the experiment chambers and the Afton family house. So, overall, Nightmarionne being tied to M1 explains a lot about his character, how he's in control of the pizzaplex, and how the story of the storyteller is being transcribed into the games. If the M1 Mimic program made it into Glitch Trap and then into the pizzaplex, the connection between these two characters becomes a lot more obvious. While the jumpscare sounds and plushies were weird back when Security Breach released, I think Secret of the Mimic gives us a pretty straightforward answer without making it too complicated. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this theory, you should like, subscribe, and comment your opinion, but most importantly, keep on theorizing.